The smell of hospital clung to my skin, like it was trying to remind me with every breath that my mom was running out of time. She slept quietly, her thin hair scattered across the 2 white pillows. Everything around us felt still, heavy. The monitors beeped steadily, but to me the sound was deafening. She had always been strong. Too strong maybe, but now she looked so small, so fragile, and all I wanted was to protect her. But I couldn't. I had done everything I could, sold my car, dropped out of college, picked up 3 jobs at cafes and boutiques. Still, it wasn't enough, not even close. The clinical trial she needed was more expensive than anything I could ever hope to afford. In that moment, I realized that pride wouldn't save her. That's when I thought of him. My grandfather, Conrad Whitmore, he was a shadow over my life, powerful, distant, legendary. I had never met him, not really. When my mom chose love over wealth and married my father, a literature professor, Conrad cut her off. No forgiveness, no second chances. I grew up with the stories. Stories of boardrooms and mergers, of power and cold ambition. And always the same ending. He never looked back, but I had no choice now. I had to try. I pulled on my best coat, one my mom had mended so many times it looked brand new, and took the train into Manhattan. His building was as intimidating as I imagined. Marble floors, silver elevators, a silence that pressed against your chest. I told the receptionist my name. She didn't blink. Until I added the last one, Isabel Carter Whitmore. That got me a second glance. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like forever. When the doors opened, I stepped into a penthouse that looked more like a museum than a home. And there he was sitting in a leather chair, watching the skyline like he owned every building in it. He didn't smile. Didn't even say my name. "Why are you here?"
he asked, his voice sharp, unreadable. I swallowed my fear.
And my pride. My mom is sick. She's going to die unless I find a way to pay for treatment. He didn't flinch. That's not my concern. It should be, I said quietly. She's your daughter. And I'm your granddaughter. He studied me like I was an equation that didn't add up. Then, after a long silence, he stood and walked to a table where an untouched glass of whiskey sat. "I can help," he said at last. "But there's a condition." I froze. "You'll marry Ethan." My stomach dropped. "Ethan Whitmore," he repeated, like I might have forgotten the name. "My oldest grandson. He needs stability, image. You'll provide that." "It's good business." Business. He talked about marriage like it was a merger. What if I say no? Then the deal is off. Just like that. My mother's life in exchange for my freedom. That night, I sat by her bedside. She looked peaceful in her sleep, her fingers twitching slightly like she was dreaming something gentle. And I cried for her. For me. For the deal I knew I'd accept, because I would do anything to save her. Asterisk, if this story is already touching you. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications, so you won't miss the next chapters of this intense journey of love, sacrifice, and impossible choices. I said yes. The words left my mouth as if they belonged to someone else. They echoed through my grandfather's cold, immaculate office like a binding spell I couldn't undo. "Very well," he replied, like I had just signed a contract. And that's exactly what it was, a contract. There were lawyers, paperwork, and terms. Marriage of convenience, they called it. For me, it felt more like a life sentence. I barely remembered Ethan from anything other than magazine covers and business segments. He always had that perfectly polished look. Tailored suits, sharp jawline, and a gaze that never softened. The next morning, I returned to the hospital. My mom was still asleep, unaware of what I had just done. And I wasn't going to tell her, not yet. Maybe not ever. It was better that way. Conrad moved fast. Within 48 hours, my mom was transferred to a private medical center in Colorado. She was surrounded by specialists, equipment, and hope. Real hope. I stood there, holding her hand before she was flown out on his private jet, and I forced a smile through my tears. She was safe now, and I was On the third day I met Ethan. He arrived late. He wore a dark blazer and walked into the room like he was the center of the universe. And maybe he was. He didn't greet me. Didn't smile. He just sat down at the edge of the table, arms crossed, eyes scanning me with cool indifference. "So, you're her," he said, like I was a product being delivered. "And you're charming," I shot back before I could stop myself. There was a pause. Then a flicker of something in his expression, maybe surprise, maybe amusement. "This might actually be fun," he muttered. Nothing about this felt fun. According to the contract, we were to marry within 1 week. Small ceremony, no guests, no real affection, just appearances. A partnership between two names that had once been torn apart, now forcibly united. Ethan made it clear he didn't want interference. He had his life, his schedule, his empire. I would live in the Hamptons estate, show up for events, smile for cameras. That was the arrangement. No romance, no feelings, no illusions. Just don't make the wrong kind of headlines, he said. "And wear white at the wedding, my grandfather insists." I stared at him, heart pounding. White, the color of purity, of surrender, of innocence. No, I wouldn't wear white. The days before the wedding felt like a blur. I was fitted for dresses, prepped for photographs, schooled on etiquette and last names. Everyone moved around me like this was normal. Like marrying a stranger for the sake of a dying mother was just another chapter in a fairy tale. But it wasn't a fairy tale. It was a transaction, and I was the collateral at the final wedding rehearsal. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. Silently for 30 minutes. No one could know. No one could see how broken I felt. But there was still one choice that was mine. If I had to walk into this cage, I'd do it with my head high, and I would wear black as if I were going to my own funeral. The morning of the wedding, the sky over the Hamptons was gray, stretched and heavy like the weight in my chest. The world outside was preparing for something beautiful, florists rushing, caterers setting up under tents, soft music floating from speakers in the garden. But inside me, everything was quiet. Too quiet. They brought the dress an hour before the ceremony. It was white. Of course. Lace, satin, pearl buttons, a dress fit for a princess. I stared at it like it was a weapon. "No," I whispered. My best friend Rachel, who had flown in just to support me, stepped closer. "Belle, are you sure about this?" I nodded. My voice barely made it out. I already made the worst decision of my life. But this I still get to choose. I reached into my own garment bag. My real dress. Black. Deep. Endless black. No frills, no shine, just a smooth silhouette, bold and unapologetic. It clung to my body like armor. Like grief, the look on the wedding planner's face when I stepped out of the dressing room was priceless. She stuttered, begged me to reconsider. Whispered something about headlines and Conrad's reputation. But I didn't flinch. I walked down the aisle in black. Guests gasped. Phones clicked. I could hear murmurs ripple like shockwaves. But I kept walking, my chin high, my spine straight. I wasn't a bride. I was a soldier. And then I saw him. Ethan stood at the altar like marble, unmoving, unreadable. He was dressed in classic black, with a crisp white shirt and the calm of a man who always gets his way. Until now. His eyes traveled over me slowly. For the first time, they didn't look bored or detached. For the first time, he looked curious. The ceremony was short, empty. The officiant rushed through the vows, and neither of us added a word of our own. When Ethan slipped the ring onto my finger, his hands were cold. When I slipped his ring on, I didn't look him in the eye. When we kissed, a brief, soulless formality, I felt nothing but the whisper of his breath and the chill of his control. At the reception, I barely touched the food. People approached us, congratulated us with fake smiles and rehearsed laughter. I smiled back like I was wearing a mask, and Ethan barely spoke to me the whole night. Except once. He leaned in as we posed for a photo and whispered, "You." Made quite a statement with the dress. I turned my head toward him, our faces only inches apart. Good, I wasn't trying to be quiet. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Almost admiration. Almost. We left the party in silence. The car ride to the Hamptons estate felt longer than it should have. I stared out the window, watching the trees blur past in the dark. When we arrived, a butler opened the door. The mansion rose before me like a castle carved in glass and steel. He led me to my room. Yes, my room. We weren't sharing one. This isn't a honeymoon, he said dryly. I didn't answer. I just stepped inside and shut the door. I stood alone for a long time, staring at my reflection in the vanity mirror. Black dress, tired eyes, and a gold ring that felt more like a shackle than a promise. This wasn't a love story. Not yet, but something inside me whispered. Maybe it wasn't over yet either. The morning after the wedding, I woke up in a room that looked like it belonged in a magazine. All white furniture, polished floors, and enormous windows that stretched from wall to wall, but it didn't feel like mine. Nothing did, not the gold ring still circling my finger, not the bed I had barely slept in, and definitely not the last name now attached to mine. Whitmore. I said it out loud once, just to hear how it sounded. It didn't fit. Not yet. Outside, the estate in the Hamptons looked like a dream. Ocean air rolled through the windows, and birds sang somewhere in the garden. But inside, it was quiet. Too perfect. Too still. I wandered downstairs barefoot, finding my way through a maze of hallways until I reached the kitchen. A staff of at least 4 people bustled in silence. They barely looked at me, as if I were a piece of furniture that had been moved into the house overnight. Then I saw him. Ethan. Sitting at the end of a long marble island, dressed in a white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, coffee in hand, phone in the other. His tie hung loose around his neck. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. He glanced at me once, then went back to reading something on his screen. Good morning, I said quietly, just to break the ice. Morning, he replied without looking up. A long pause. Did you sleep well? I asked. He smirked. Considering I got married to a woman who wore black to the ceremony and made national headlines overnight. Surprisingly, yes. I crossed my arms. Good, that makes one of us. He finally looked up then, and for a brief moment, something unreadable flashed behind his eyes. You really don't care what anyone thinks, do you? I shrugged. Not anymore.
He stared at me, expression flat. Well, he said, setting down his cup. As agreed, separate lives, shared appearances.
We'll be at the gala next Friday. My assistant will send you the details. And that was it. Our arrangement. Our entire marriage, summed up in 2 sentences. I wasn't expecting warmth, but I didn't think it would feel this hollow either. After breakfast, if you could call half a cup of tea and silence a meal, I walked the grounds. The property was massive. There were flower-lined paths, a greenhouse, even a private stretch of beach. It was beautiful, isolated, designed for someone who had everything except real company. Later, Rachel called to check on me. She asked how I was holding up. I'm fine. I lied, but part of me wasn't, because no matter how much I told myself this was just a deal, part of me kept looking for signs of something real. A spark, a reaction, anything. And then that evening, I caught Ethan watching me. I was reading a book in the sunroom, legs tucked beneath me, hair loose when I felt it. His eyes. He didn't speak, just stood in the doorway for a moment, silently studying me, as if trying to figure out a puzzle he didn't quite understand. Then he turned and left. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew one thing. This marriage might be fake, but the tension between us, that was starting to feel very real. It didn't take long for the house to feel like a stage. We had separate bedrooms, separate routines, and separate lives. And yet, every morning the staff prepared breakfast for 2. Every evening, 2 sets of dinner plates were placed, perfectly aligned at opposite ends of the long dining table. Sometimes we ate in silence. Other times, we didn't eat together at all. Ethan was always busy. Meetings, phone calls, events. I'd see him passing through the house in tailored suits, always moving like he had somewhere more important to be. And maybe he did. I spent most of my days alone, walking through gardens, flipping through fashion magazines, sketching in the quiet corners of the library. I didn't belong in his world of business empires and silent power plays, but I wasn't sure where I belonged anymore. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling in my oversized room. The sheets smelled like lavender, the pillows were soft. The windows framed the stars. But it never felt like home. The only thing real in that house was the echo of what I had sacrificed. One evening, maybe a week into our arrangement, I found myself in the kitchen late at night. I couldn't sleep. I didn't expect him to be there, but he was leaning against the counter, a glass of scotch in hand, no tie, hair slightly out of place. We both froze for a second. I couldn't sleep, I said. He nodded. Neither could I. I walked to the fridge, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the opposite counter. We stood there for a long moment, not talking, not avoiding. Just existing in the same room. You like to draw, he said suddenly, catching me off guard. My eyes narrowed. You've been looking through my stuff? No, he said calmly. I saw you sketching in the library yesterday. There was something in his tone, not mocking, not dismissive, just Dorius. I wanted to be a designer, I said quietly. Before all this.
He nodded, and for the first time, his voice softened just slightly. You still can.
I laughed under my breath. I'm living in a house that isn't mine, married to a man I barely know, playing dress-up for the public. Do you really think there's room for dreams in all this?
He didn't respond right away, then he said something that surprised me.
I don't dream anymore. It hit me harder than I expected. That admission, simple, raw, cracked something open. We didn't say much more that night. But something shifted. After that, the silence between us felt different. Less like a wall, and more like a space being slowly filled. He started asking me questions about my mom, about my childhood, even about my favorite books. He listened. And I started noticing the little things about him. The way he loosened his tie the second he walked through the door. The way he touched his watch when he was nervous. The way he never, ever talked about his past. It was still complicated. Still distant. But not cold. One morning, he passed by me in the hallway and said, "You look nice today." Before continuing on his way. My heart did something I didn't expect. It fluttered. I told myself it was nothing. Just politeness. Habit. But the part of me that used to believe in fairy tales? She was starting to stir. Dinner with the Whitmores was never just dinner. It was war disguised as silverware. That Friday evening, I sat at the end of an impossibly long dining table in the Manhattan penthouse, feeling like a poorly placed piece on someone else's chessboard. The chandelier above sparkled like it had secrets to tell, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the New York skyline that was breathtaking and completely irrelevant compared to the tension inside the room. Conrad Whitmore sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding everything. His gaze rarely left me. I could feel it, sharp, weighing, dissecting. He didn't speak often, but when he did, the entire room listened like the stock market depended on it. To his right, Ethan sat tall, quiet, unreadable as always. His wine glass stayed full. His plate barely touched. I couldn't tell if he was bored or bracing for impact. To his left, various members of the Whitmore Empire, cousins, board members, family friends, people who talked with polished smiles and hidden knives in their voices. I was the outsider, the girl in black who had dared to marry into a dynasty. They asked me questions with too much sweetness. So, Isabel, what do you do all day while Ethan saves the world? How does it feel to go from barista to billionaires? Are you planning on doing something useful? I smiled politely, answered calmly, but I could feel the heat rising in my chest. I sketch, I said at one point. I'm working on reviving an old design portfolio. I've always wanted to start a fashion line. That got a few raised eyebrows. One woman laughed, softly but not kindly. How adorable. Before I could reply, Ethan spoke. She's good, he said, not looking up from his plate. She has real vision. The entire table quieted for a second. So did I. I glanced at him. He didn't meet my eyes, but something in his voice, the steady confidence, the hint of defense, struck something deep. Inside me. He had stood up for me, not because he had to, because he wanted to. The rest of the meal continued in strained civility. Conversation shifted. Wine flowed. Laughter rose and fell like an artificial tide, but the balance had changed. Later that night, Back in the Hamptons, I sat in the garden wrapped in a shawl, watching the stars blink over the sea. Ethan came out quietly, hands in his pockets. You didn't have to say anything, I told him. I know. I looked at him. Why did you? He hesitated. Because they don't know you, he said, and they don't get to decide who you are. I swallowed the lump in my throat.
His words
Were simple. But they mattered. They mattered more than I wanted to admit. In that moment, I didn't feel like a pawn anymore. I felt seen. And for the first time since this marriage began, I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Ethan Whitmore was more than just a cold, calculated stranger. Maybe he was something else entirely. I thought I had hidden it well, the truth about my mother's past. The way our family had been broken long before I ever stepped foot into the Whitmore world. But secrets, I was learning, had a way of surfacing. Especially in houses with eyes in every hallway. It started with a letter, a small envelope. No return address slipped under my door. Inside was a photocopy of a newspaper article from nearly 2 decades ago. A scandal, a name. My mother's name. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling as I read. Apparently, when my mother left the Whitmore empire, she didn't just walk away. She exposed them. Financial discrepancies. Family manipulation. A quiet betrayal that cost Conrad more than just pride. It cost him power. It was all buried. But not forgotten. And now. It was in my hands. Later that evening, Ethan found me in the library, curled up in one of the leather chairs, staring into nothing. He closed the door behind him. You got it too?
he asked. I looked up, confused. The letter, he clarified. I
Nodded slowly. You knew? I didn't know what was in it. But someone wanted you to find it. I held it up. She fought back, I whispered. She didn't just run. She tried to burn the whole system down. Ethan's jaw tensed. But he didn't look surprised. She had every reason to, he said softly. Your mom was one of the few people brave enough to stand up to Conrad. I stared at him. Why didn't you say anything? He leaned against the bookshelf, arms crossed. Because I thought it would hurt you more. Because it's not who she is now, because you needed to find it when you were ready. I blinked back tears. He cut her off. He cut me off. All because she wouldn't play his game. And now you're in it, he said. The same game. I nodded, the weight of it settling deeper on my shoulders, but instead of pushing me away, Ethan sat beside me. He didn't speak at first. Just sat in silence, letting it settle between us. Then, softly, he said, You're not like them. I looked at him. And you are?
He didn't flinch. I was for a long time.
There was a sadness in his voice I hadn't heard before. Not bitterness, just exhaustion. I used to think power made me safe, he said. That control kept people out. But maybe all it did was keep me empty. Something in me cracked then, not in pain, but in understanding. We were both wounded in ways neither of us had dared admit. The difference was, I had spent my life fighting to survive, and he had spent his trying not to feel. I reached out, almost, without thinking, and took his hand. For once, he didn't pull away. We sat like that for a long time. No masks, no contracts. Just two broken people trying to understand where they ended and where they could begin. And in that moment, I realized something simple and terrifying. The only thing more dangerous than falling for Ethan Whitmore was letting him fall for me. *4. The first time since the wedding, I felt like I could breathe, not because things were suddenly simple. They weren't, but because something between Ethan and me had shifted. We had stopped pretending we were strangers playing parts in a performance neither of us wanted. And though we hadn't said anything out loud, the silence between us no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a beginning. Still, I needed something that was mine. Something untouched by the Whitmore name. Something that reminded me of who I was before this deal, this mansion, this life. So I called Rachel. I want to bring the sketches back, I told her. The ones I used to hide in that coffee shop. Notebook, the ones that actually made me feel alive. She didn't hesitate. Let's do it. By the next afternoon, we were sitting on the sun-drenched patio behind the estate. Papers spread across a table, coffee cups half full, and pens. In motion, Rachel had always believed in me, long before I believed in myself. She had contacts in LA, a small but loyal following from her fashion blog, and the kind of creative fire I had missed desperately. This could be something real, she said, holding up one of my designs. You have something no one else has. A voice, a story. I smiled, even if a little nervously. A scandalous billionaire family soap opera kind of story? She laughed. Exactly, use it. Later that day, I returned inside to find Ethan in the library, phone to his ear, pacing like usual. But when he saw me, he stopped. You look happy, he said. I blinked, surprised. I think I am.
He hung up the call, slipping his phone
into his pocket. What were you working on outside? I hesitated, unsure how much of myself I was ready to share. But something about his eyes, steady, focused, made me speak. My fashion line, I said. Or the dream of one. He nodded slowly. Is that why you've been walking around the house with pens behind your ear and fabric samples in your bag? I laughed. Maybe.
He stepped closer, curiosity softening the sharp edges of his usual expression. Do you have a name for it? I hesitated.
Then I whispered, Carter. It was my mother's name. The one not weighed down by empires or expectations. The one. I almost lost. His gaze lingered on me, unreadable for a moment. That's a good name. He said. Something in his voice made my heart flutter. There was no sarcasm, no dismissal. Just quiet approval. And somehow that mattered. The next morning, I found a surprise waiting for me in the study. A vintage dress form, a brand new sketchbook, and a single note written in neat, masculine handwriting. Keep building. I stared at the gift for a long time, fingers brushing the edge of the sketchbook. He saw me. Not just the girl in a black dress, not just the wife in a fake marriage. And I had no idea what terrified me more, that I might be falling for him, or that he might already be falling for me. I should have expected it. No story like this stays quiet for long. Not when the man you're married to has history wrapped in diamonds, magazine covers, and past mistakes in designer heels. Her name was Savannah, and apparently she didn't believe in staying gone. It happened on a Tuesday. I was organizing my sketch samples in the sunroom when I heard the gate buzz. A few minutes later, the staff was whispering in the hallway. Then came the sound of stilettos on marble, bold, confident, familiar. I stepped into the foyer just in time to see her toss her sunglasses into her perfectly styled hair and wrap her arms around Ethan like they hadn't missed a single day apart. Hello, stranger, she said, smiling like sin. Ethan didn't hug her back. Savannah, he said flatly. This isn't a good time. She turned toward me, her eyes sweeping over me slowly, calculating. Amused? And you must be the wife, she said with a smirk. Cute dress. I wore something similar to Ethan's brother's wedding, back when the Whitmores still did. Real marriages. I smiled politely, ignoring the jab. I'm Isabel. And yes, we're married. Legally, publicly, all the usual ways. She laughed, high and sharp. Well, darling, I hope you've at least figured out how to keep him entertained. That was always the hard part. I should have walked away. Should have said something cold and dismissive and ended the moment. But instead I stood there, frozen. Because for the first time since marrying Ethan, I felt something ugly curl in my chest. Jealousy. Not because she was stunning. Not because she had history with him, but because she knew parts of him. I didn't, and she knew that I knew that. After she left, dramatically of course, with a trail of perfume behind her, I found Ethan alone in his office, staring out the window like the city could give him answers. She just showed up, he said without turning. I nodded, arms crossed. She said some things. I'm sure she did. A long silence stretched between us. Were you in love with her? I finally asked. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw something real flash behind his carefully built armor. No, he said. Not the way people write about in books. He paused. I thought I needed her. I mistook control for connection. We were good at looking perfect. That was all. I swallowed hard. And us? He held my gaze. I don't know yet, but it's not pretend anymore. My breath caught. He walked toward me slowly. I know this started as a transaction. But lately, I think about you. I look for you in the house. I listen for your laugh, that's not business. My heart beat wildly in my chest, but I wasn't ready to fall, not yet. Not when everything still felt so fragile. Still, I said the truth that was burning at the edge of my ribs. I think about you too. He smiled then, just a little. A smile that didn't need a spotlight or an audience. It was for me. And suddenly, Savannah wasn't a threat anymore, because I realized something important. You can't compete with someone's past when you're becoming their future. Asterisk. By the time I learned how deep the game went, I was already part of it. The Whitmores didn't just play with money. They played with people. Power was their language, and manipulation was the art form they passed down like heirlooms. It started with whispers. Rachel sent me a message from Los Angeles. Are you okay? There are rumors flying around about you. Some blogs claiming the marriage is fake. I froze. We had taken every precaution. Every public appearance, every headline, every smile for the camera, all carefully staged. But someone was working against us. Against me. Ethan confirmed it that night. He sat across from me in the sitting room, his jaw tense, fingers steepled. Like he was holding back a storm. My grandfather's behind it, he said. I blinked. Conrad, Ethan nodded. He's testing you, us, trying to see if you'll break under pressure. Why? I asked, anger rising in my chest. Why would he sabotage his own plan? He looked at me, eyes sharp and clear. Because he never wanted a partner for me, he wanted a pawn. And you're not playing the way he expected. I let out a bitter laugh. Because I wore black to his golden wedding? Because you have a voice? Because you're building something that doesn't need his name? Because you challenge me, and that terrifies him. I stared at Ethan, stunned by how much he understood, and how quietly he had been watching it all unravel. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I thought I could shield you.
He admitted, but I can't, you're in it now. We both are.
The next day, I found myself sitting across from Conrad in his private office in the city. The room was a museum of wealth, dark wood, heavy books, golden accents. He poured himself a drink, then looked at me like I was a minor inconvenience he had to tolerate. You're clever, he said. I'll give you that. I'm not here to impress you. No, he smiled. But you're here because you think you can win. I am not trying to win. I'm just trying to live. He studied me for a moment. You think Ethan's your partner now, that he'll choose you over the empire. I said nothing. He won't, he continued. Not when it matters. My hands curled into fists in my lap. You raised him to believe that, I said quietly. But you don't know him anymore. He raised an eyebrow. I know the Whitmore blood. And it always bends toward power. I left that office shaking. That night, Ethan came to my room. He didn't knock. Just walked in like the walls between us didn't matter anymore. I heard you went to see him. I did. He sat down beside me, not touching but close. What did he say? I turned to him, my voice steady, that you'll never choose me over the empire. A long pause. Then Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. I've spent most of my life doing what Conrad expected. I became what he built, polished, strategic, controlled. I waited, holding my breath. But lately, he said, every time I picture the future, it doesn't look like boardrooms and press releases. I looked at him. What does it look like? He met my eyes. Your designs. That sunroom full of sketches. A quiet morning. A real life. My heart cracked open, and in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just a marriage of names anymore. We weren't players in someone else's game. We were rewriting the rules, together. I never thought a dress would change everything, but that night in New York, under 100 chandeliers and 1,000 eyes, it did. The gala was one of those events people wrote about for weeks. It wasn't just fashion and champagne. It was influence. The kind of room where whispers could shake stock markets. Ethan stood beside me like stone carved into human form. Sharp suit, calm expression, and a presence that quieted every room we entered. But when he looked at me that night, he didn't see a prop. He saw me, and I felt it. Because when I walked into that ballroom wearing the first dress from my upcoming line, the one I designed, stitched, and finished with trembling hands. The room stopped. Silk, midnight blue. Cut to the waist with a bold open back and a neckline that said I know exactly who I am. People turned. Some gasped. Cameras clicked. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't the girl in black anymore. I was the woman I had fought to become. Rachel had flown in just for the launch. She whispered in my ear as she passed me a glass of champagne. You did it, they see you now. But the only eyes I cared about were Ethan's, and he looked shaken. Not in the way that suggested scandal. In the way that meant he saw me differently. Not as his wife by arrangement. Not as a clever move on a chessboard, but as something he wanted, really wanted. For the first time after the third interview and fourth flash of paparazzi, I slipped out onto the rooftop terrace. I needed air, space, a break from the applause. That's when he found me. You were brilliant tonight,
He said, coming to stand beside me. I didn't respond right away.
Just watched the lights of the city blink below us like stars that had fallen too far to reach. Did you know? I asked. That I'd feel like this. Like what? Like I don't belong here, but also like I've never belonged anywhere more.
He turned toward me. That's how I feel about you.
My breath caught. He stepped closer. I've stood in this world my whole life. And not once have I ever been more proud to be beside someone. It wasn't a grand speech. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And in a world of masks, real was the rarest thing of all. I turned to face him, heart pounding. Ethan, I don't want this to be fake anymore, he said, voice low. Not even in the corners of our lives, I swallowed. You're scared, he nodded, terrified. Me too.
His hand brushed mine gently. I want to be yours, he whispered. For real.
But not if it means pulling you into the darkness I come from. I shook my head. You don't pull me down. You pull me forward. He closed the space between us, fingers finding my jaw like I was something he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch. And when he kissed me, slow, deep, and full of everything we hadn't dared say, the world fell away. There were no headlines. No contracts. No Whitmore legacy watching us from the shadows. There was just us. Two people who didn't choose how we began. But who might finally be choosing how we continue? Asterisk desire changes everything. It sneaks in quietly at first, in a glance held too long, in a touch that lingers just a second more than it should. Then it builds slow and dangerous until it consumes you whole. That's what it felt like with Ethan. After the gala, something cracked wide open between us. The tension that had been simmering under every conversation, every near miss, every stolen look. It finally spilled out. We tried to pretend it didn't matter, but we were lying to ourselves. Everything mattered now. One morning, I came downstairs to find Ethan already in the kitchen, shirt slightly wrinkled, hair tousled like he hadn't slept much. He was staring at his coffee, lost in thought. I stepped in, barefoot, wearing one of his oversized sweaters I had stolen from the laundry. His eyes lifted slowly, traveling over me with that quiet, focused intensity that always made me forget how to breathe. You didn't come to bed last night, I said softly. He nodded. Couldn't sleep. Because of me? He didn't answer right away. Then, because I don't know what I'm doing anymore. That made two of us. Later. That day, we got into our first real fight. It started over something stupid. A magazine headline twisting our story again. They claimed I was manipulating Ethan, transforming the Whitmore heir into a puppet. I laughed when I read it. He didn't. You think this is funny?
He snapped. I think it's pathetic, I said.
That people care more about rumors than reality. But they do, he bit back. They always have. And they always will. There was something beneath his voice, something sharp and buried. This isn't about the article, I said. He looked away. It's about control, isn't it? About the fact that this, us, doesn't follow your rules. You're the first thing in my life I can't manage, he said quietly. And you hate that? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe I hate how much I want it anyway. The air between us thickened, heavy, electric. I stepped closer, our breathing sensed. Like the silence was pulling us together more than words ever could. I'm not your enemy, Ethan, I whispered. I know. And I'm not your property. I know that too. His hand found my waist. Mine gripped his collar. We didn't kiss like people testing the waters. We kissed like people drowning, who had finally found each other. It was messy, desperate, honest. Afterward, we sat on the floor of his office, backs against the wall, tangled in silence. Does this change everything? I asked. He looked at me, jaw clenched, eyes raw. Yes, he said. And we both knew it was true. We weren't pretending anymore. But that truth came with a price. Because love, the real kind, demands more than passion. It demands trust. And deep down we both knew that part we hadn't earned yet. I thought I was ready for anything, but not for this. The truth came wrapped in silence. Not a dramatic reveal, not a scandalous confrontation, just a quiet moment when everything shifted. And I realized I had never really known the whole story. It started with a document. I found it by accident, tucked beneath a stack of papers on Ethan's desk while looking for a missing sketch of mine. It wasn't hidden. It was simply there. The marriage agreement. The public one. The original one. The one drafted between Conrad and Ethan before I ever stepped into that penthouse office. My name was already on it. I stood there, reading in stunned silence as the pieces clicked. Together. He knew. Ethan had known from the beginning. He had agreed to the arrangement before I had even been approached.
He'd signed the deal. He'd had time to say no.
Time to protect me. Time to choose something else. But he idea in single quotes. And now all the little things. The cold way we met. The way he never looked surprised when I agreed to the marriage. His silence. In those early days, they all made sense. It hadn't just been Conrad's manipulation. It had been Ethan's. Too. When he walked into the room and saw the paper in my hand.
His face changed instantly. Isabel, don't, I said.
Voice shaking. Just don't. He took a step forward. Let me explain. You knew, I said. You chose this. You let me believe I had any power in that room, any choice. You stood there and watched me walk into this trap like I had control. It wasn't like that, he said. At first, yes. I signed, but after what? I cut in. After I gave up everything? After I sold myself for my mother's life and started to fall for the man holding the cage door open. His jaw clenched. I didn't plan to fall for you. And I didn't plan to hate you. That word, hate, tasted like fire. His face went pale. I couldn't stand to look at him. I need air, I whispered. He didn't follow me. I walked out of the mansion barefoot, not caring about the wind or the cold or the fact that my heart felt like it had been ripped out and left behind on the floor of his office. Everything I thought we had, the stolen glances, the slow trust, the heat of his hands on my skin. It all felt like a lie, because he let me believe we were equals, and we never were, not really. I found myself down by the shoreline, waves lapping at my toes, the sky gray and endless above me. And I cried, not just for the betrayal, but because I had started to believe in him. In us. And now I didn't know what was real anymore. Maybe. None of it ever was. Asterisk. I didn't answer his calls. Not the first day. Not the second. Not even when Rachel messaged to say he'd been trying to reach me nonstop. I needed space. To breathe. To think, to feel the full weight of what had just shattered between us. I stayed in a small hotel in Montauk, far from the Hamptons mansion, far from the Whitmore name. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel peaceful. Now it just felt empty. Part of me wanted to go back. To scream at him. To demand an explanation that would make it hurt less. But the other part, the stronger one, told me to protect what little I had left of myself. And yet, I kept hearing his voice in my head, the way he said my name when he was vulnerable. The way he looked at me like I was something he wasn't sure he deserved. I hated that I missed him. I hated it even more that I still loved him. On the third night, I opened the door to find him standing there. No bodyguards. No driver. No polished suit. Just Ethan. Alone. His eyes looked tired. Like he hadn't slept. Like this silence between us had worn him down too. I didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. I had to see you.
He said. I crossed my arms, holding the door.
Only halfway open. Why now? Because you deserve the truth. All of it. I waited. He took a breath, like the words were sharp in his throat. Yes, I agreed to the deal. Before I ever met you. I did it for the company, for the image, for Conrad. That part is true. My stomach twisted. But the part I never told you, he continued, was that I almost backed out. When I saw your name on the contract, when I realized who you were, something stopped me. What? I asked, my voice hoarse. You looked like her, he said. Like your mother. Like someone who didn't belong in a world that eats people alive. I didn't know what to say. He stepped closer. At first, I thought I could handle it, that I could keep it distant, that I could separate business from emotion like I always had. He swallowed, but then you showed up in black. And you didn't flinch. You looked at me like I wasn't untouchable. Like I was just a man. And I think that's when everything started to fall apart. My grip on the door faltered. I made a mistake, he said. Not in marrying you, but in lying by omission. In letting you walk into a fire I helped light. I was a coward. I finally opened the door wider. You hurt me, I whispered. No, you broke something.
He nodded. And I'll spend as long as it takes trying to rebuild it, if you let me.
Silence stretched between us. Then I stepped back. He entered the room slowly, as if afraid the floor might collapse. Beneath him, I didn't hug him. He didn't touch me. We just sat across from each other. Two people who had burned down the illusion and were staring at the ashes, wondering if something real could still rise. And for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again, not because it was fixed, but because at least now, it was honest. The call came the next morning. I was still in the hotel room, wrapped in a borrowed robe, the quiet between Ethan and me fragile but real. We hadn't touched. We hadn't kissed. We had just stayed in the silence, in the honesty, in the wreckage of what we used to be. But when his phone rang and he saw the name on the screen, I could feel the shift in his body. Conrad?
He said flatly, he answered. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor as I listened to the
quiet hum of a conversation I couldn't hear, and yet, somehow understood. When he hung up, he turned to me. He knows where I am. Of course he does. He's giving me a choice, Ethan said. Return to the board. Clean up the scandal. Reinforce the marriage publicly or step away. My chest tightened. And if you step away, I lose everything. I nodded. So, what will it be? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the window, looking out at the ocean. Then he said something I'll never forget. I've been building a kingdom I don't want to rule. And now I've met the only person who makes me question what it was all for. My breath caught. He turned to face me, eyes full of fire. And fear and clarity. I'm choosing you. I blinked. I'm resigning from the Whitmore board. I'm selling my shares. I'm walking away.
You're serious? Yes, my heart slammed in my chest. Why?
I asked, barely able to speak. Why would you give all that up? Because I want to build something that doesn't require me to sacrifice the people I love, he said. Because I don't want to become Conrad. And because I want to know what it's like to be with someone who sees me, not the name, not the title. Just me. Tears filled my eyes and I didn't even try to stop them. I didn't ask you to do this. I know, he said gently. But loving someone means you make the choice before they even know they need it. He crossed the room and knelt in front of me. I'm not offering you a mansion or a dynasty anymore. I'm offering you a future. One that we build, brick by brick, as equals. I touched his face, fingers trembling. You gave up an empire. I did, he whispered, but I'm hoping I didn't lose you. I leaned in slowly, pressing my forehead to his. You didn't lose me, I said. You finally found me. In that moment, I knew this wasn't about contracts or family legacies, or carefully curated headlines. This was about love. Messy, terrifying, beautiful love, the kind you fight for. The kind that asks everything and gives even more. And Ethan Whitmore, the man who once chose power over people, had just chosen me. Asterisk freedom. Doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like silence, space, a breath that finally fills your lungs. Without hurting, leaving the Whitmore estate for good felt surreal. There was no press release, no dramatic confrontation, no last glance over the shoulder, just boxes. A quiet car ride. And Ethan beside me, his hand in mine. Steady. He wasn't the same man I married. And I wasn't the same girl who walked down the aisle in black. We moved to Los Angeles, a place far from Conrad's empire, from the expectations and rules that had defined our every step. It was warm, wild, alive. I could walk down the street and be nobody again. But this time, it wasn't because I had nothing. It was because I was finally everything to myself. Rachel, and I launched the brand in a small studio downtown. The sign out front was simple, Carter in bold, unapologetic lettering, my mother's name. My name, mine. We started small, limited pieces, handmade fabrics, stories sewn into every hem. It wasn't about money, it was about truth.
About
Telling women like me that they weren't invisible. That softness didn't mean weakness. That power could look like vulnerability and still shine. Ethan showed up to our first show in jeans and a plain white tee. No press, no drama. Just pride in his eyes as I walked out onto that tiny runway with my heart beating louder than the music. Afterward, he pulled me into his arms backstage and whispered, "You were never meant to be someone's shadow." I smiled, my hands on his chest. I just needed to find my own light. We lived in a modest home overlooking the hills, filled with books and music and plants I kept accidentally killing. We burned toast more mornings than not. We fought sometimes, over dishes, over work, over where the damn extra keys were, but we laughed. A lot and slowly. The echoes of our past stopped chasing us. One night, months after the launch, Ethan came. Home late, shirt wrinkled, eyes tired, but with that same soft smile he only ever saved for me. "Guess what?" he said. "What?" He reached into his pocket and handed me a tiny newspaper clipping, an article from a small business column. Carter, the new name redefining elegance in American fashion. I stared at it, breath catching in my throat. "I told you," he said, "the world was always going to see you." But I had already seen myself. And that was enough. We weren't perfect. But we were free, not just from Conrad, from the version of ourselves we had outgrown. This wasn't a happy ending. It was a beginning. One we chose. Together. Asterisk. This time I wore white, not because someone told me to, not because it was tradition. Not because it was required. But because I chose it. Soft, flowing, simple. No corset, no tiara, no expectations. Just silk that moved with me. Not against me. A dress that felt like peace. The ceremony was nothing like the first. It wasn't in a ballroom. Or on the front page of a society magazine. It was in a field just outside Los Angeles, where wildflowers grew in messy rows and the sun painted everything gold. Rachel stood to my left, wiping tears before they even started. My mom held my hand before I walked down the aisle, whispering, "He sees the real you. Don't ever settle for less again." Ethan waited beneath an arch of eucalyptus and soft linen. There were maybe 30 people there. Friends, chosen family. No press, no pressure. Just love. And when I stepped into the light, he looked at me like the entire world had stilled. Not because I was wearing white, but because I was walking toward him by choice. Not out of sacrifice, not out of desperation, but because I loved him. Because I wanted him. The vows were simple, honest, no performative promises. Just truths we had already lived through. "I don't want perfect," I told him. "I just want real. The hard days, the laughter, the quiet mornings and loud nights. I want all of it. With you." His eyes were glassy when he spoke. "You taught me that love doesn't take. It gives, it heals. And I want to spend every day giving you the life you were always meant to live." When we kissed, it wasn't for cameras or contracts. It was soft and steady. An hours later, barefoot in the grass, dancing beneath string lights and stars, I caught myself thinking about the girl I used to be, the one who walked into a fake marriage. In a black dress, holding her breath, ready to survive, and I smiled, because that girl had become this woman, not because she was saved, but because she saved herself. This wasn't the ending. People expected. It wasn't the story Conrad tried to script. It wasn't a headline or a scandal. It was ours, and it was real. Real.